sort of academic work, all sort of academic work and surveys and all those sorts of things are focusing typically on one of those three and variations of each of those three, depending on the school of thought that they come from. What none of them do is look at all three together and then look at them together with management processes. Management processes, though, where they have been looked at, tend to look at the linear process of coming up to a decision making and things like this, not the intangible things that, if you really look at it from a true process perspective, you would then see the odd telephone call, the discussion around the water cooler, all those things are part of the process of managing, but none of them are added in any written work that I've ever come across. And so it's all sort of mixed up here, and that's what the paper I'm doing at the moment and for the presentation in February is linked to.
Okay. Did you need anything else for me relative to thinking on this? Because like I said, I was coming at it from the point of really questioning the entire design of performance management.
I mean, from the power point of view, I see John's joined us. Welcome, John. What about Adriana and John? What's your view? What I've done here is a diagram which is looking at different forms of power in relation to achieving the outcomes of the strategic objectives via the performance management system, which is typically how organizations do it. And I've shown the end product as compliance. Any comments when you look at that diagram? Hi, Jen.
I'll go last.
If you want to. Anybody got any comments?
All right. Okay. I won't. If I talk too much, just shut me up, right? Because I always talk a lot. So the problem
I'll go like this.
Okay. All right. The immediate problem I see is that these controls and these diagrams and process controls are static. They are nouns, and what all they can do is capture a point in time. Whereas actually an organization is a dynamic system.
Yep, I agree.
And these diagrams and these ideas and these separations don't cover a dynamic system. So you know, in order to do that, in order to, so what was the question? And I think the reason that these performance management systems fail is to say, right, so we have a point. This is what we believe performance is today, right? So let's document that, and let's get a PowerPoint, let's get a committee agreement, and we do that, and then you lock it in, and that becomes, you know, this bones inside this organization. But they're never going to get it right. But they're going to lock an organization into that ossified way of thinking. Whereas
John, if I just interrupt for a second, I agree with everything you've said so far. The diagram is about the sources of information, not whether it's static or dynamic. It's the sources of the power that are used in the system, which is a little bit different to whether the information that's going into the PMS is dynamic or static. I agree totally with what you've said, but this diagram is just looking at the origins of the power system.
Yeah, which let me jump back. Here's an earlier slide that looks at positional and personal powers and trying to figure out how they're actually utilized in organizations traditionally and how they could be used differently.
Ross, would it be helpful if I sling my thing on and take them through the first few slides? Then it may, because for us it's inherent knowledge because we've looked at it, whereas for the others it's coming in cold. Because John, I really support everything you've just said, I really do. And there's a lot more even than the dynamic side that's missing in most of them.
Okay, Reg, you have a co-host.
Okay, where are we? Okay, this is just a very quick list. It's not finished. This is the presentation for the discussion that I'll be doing in February. And so I won't go into that list now, but basically I start off with this very simple basic what power is, and this is good old Angela Merkel from Germany, who basically got everybody in the EU to do what she wanted them to do. And then you've got the academic sort of title that it's the ability to get things done the way one wants them to be done. And so I start to unwrap this and say, well, we can have positive and negative consequences in power, and we can align the organization and move together to achieve goals, but also autocracy can destroy companies and countries alike. And we know that we have many, many examples of that because of the corruptive of power. And so I then look at, well, let's look at 8 dimensions of power. The first 4 are the positional power. That's the legitimate one. What is your role? So organizations give you that power associated with a role. And then depending on where you are and what you're doing, you get reward power, coercive power, the negative side, and then we have the resource power. You have the authority to control who has what resources. Sometimes that is linked to legitimate power in your role, but not always. And then on the personal side, you've got the referent power. This is what people associate with you. Are you a nice person to do business with? Can we get on with each other and support each other and so on? You then have the expert power, which is here we have to be careful because there are many definitions of expert power, but in the role power definitions I'm using here, the expert is what you can do as an expert and also what you can teach to others in your expert role. And then the information power, which sometimes gets mixed up with expert power, this is what you know as a person. And then the connection power, it's all about your network. Who do you know? And so by looking at those 8 sources of power, and I know it's not exclusive, and power is a very, very complex subject. It's extremely complex. And so I want to keep it very simple here. And so if we look at these and we say the traditional hierarchical structure, that's predominantly designed on the use of legitimate power and resource power. They're the 2 main drivers for the structure of the organization. And they then create this hierarchy of power, typically at the top of the organization. And then if we get into the reward power and coercive power, because they need that, because their legitimate power and resource power isn't achieving what they want. So they now bring in reward power, the carrot and stick of the organization, through some form of performance management system in order to get us to behave in the way that they want us to. And so they achieve compliance. And they do this because the legitimate power and the resource power that was the origin of the organization was not sufficient for people to do exactly what the organization wanted them to do. And there's a lot of research and history on that sort of natural process from organization design. And so if we now look at some of them, say, well, let's go to the project management type matrix organization. And this is really important because since the 1970s, over 50% of organizations now have adopted the matrix organization. And it's quite an interesting phenomenon because they've adopted it to try and overcome some of the inherent problems of the traditional hierarchical approach. And they do this by using expert power in the functional line management through running typically projects and getting people from the different parts of the organization. But when you actually open it up, it is still a hierarchical, traditional, bureaucratic organization. So it doesn't solve the problem. It actually makes it worse, because we now have two forms of legitimate power, and there's even an argument over the legitimacy of one over the other, telling people what to do. In a really good, sound operating organization, by clearly defining what their responsibilities are for the expert line and the project manager, then you overcome some of those. But that's okay until there is some real discussion in the program management, typically over resource issues, and then it starts to break down again. And so we have this predominant hierarchical approach to using power, whatever form of organization we look to, the traditional hierarchy, but also when we look at holacracy and similar organizations, they have just labeled it differently. When you actually unwrap them, you still have this same form of power control. And so the picture you saw just now was, well, let's have a look at this performance management system in terms of power and its roots, where it comes from. And when you start to unwrap it, it makes sense. It makes sense that we will get compliance, because it's the classic objectives, which is the strategic side. It's getting the people through some form of performance management system to behave in order, through different processes and matrix, to get the alignment of the people in the business and operational metrics. And the system, carrot, stick, whichever system they're using, is not about motivation. When you look at the design of these systems, they're using very outdated methodologies and mindsets and really old, challengeable research that will never give any form of commitment. It's all about compliance. And so that's where I bring that diagram in. And so just take it one little step further. If we actually look at, on the personal power, the referent power, the information power and the connection power, and sometimes with the expert power, depending whether that expert and the referent power come together. Is this someone you could associate with this expert, or is it someone you would never go to because they only know how to tell you how to do things and not listen? And so we have this informal, or some people call it the shadow organization. I prefer informal because there are different types of informal organizations. We're not using, in this informal organization, the positional power of the organization. And yet this is where most of the work gets done, on the right-hand side. And so it started to ask questions of myself, well, what do we do in order, when we're looking at the power and control? We've got this positional power, we've got this personal power, and there's a relationship between the three main ones and the expert. And so if we start to look at how the informal uses the power, maybe, just maybe, we can start to think about what happens when we distribute authority and power in organizations. And it's also important, I think, to remember that there isn't just one informal network. There are many. And they are reforming and forming depending on what the task is they want to do. They will go to a different network of the person will go to one of their different networks depending on what they want to do, which again starts to challenge the thinking of one way of doing things. And it comes to what you were saying, John, about the dynamics of the organization. You know, this is not a linear organization. The dynamics are very different at any one time, and the same problem will have different dynamics next time because there are different constraints and boundaries on each problem. And so the challenge for us, I suggest, is to start to get into our understanding of this power dynamic, both in the formal organization, the informal, and capitalize on what we learned already. There's a lot of research gone on. Look at the areas that we're uncertain about and try and make sense of those so that we can go into what we need to do in order to enable an organization to operate more effectively, particularly with distributed authority in decision making. And then I go later into this process of the processes of organization and management, of which there are many issues that need to be looked at and rethought. So that's what that diagram was all about. So I'll stop the share there. Back to you, Ross.
Yep, very good. One thing I caught my attention though, and we need to remember, is that Zoom always wants to create a rectangle of speakers in the upper right-hand corner. And that blocks up some of the slides if you have any content in that part of the slide. And there is a way to adjust that, but it has to be on the host side, because I was playing with it on my side and I couldn't control it. So we have to remember that again when we first set up the sharing the screen to verify what's being shared, so we get a good recording when we go live. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's very much the first draft of the presentation, so that will be fine-tuned. Yeah.
Raj, I have a couple questions.
Yeah, sure.
I'm sorry, Ross, today. Okay. Could you walk through a little bit about where it breaks down in the matrix? I followed you when you were talking about how, you know, the competencies are kind of linked to the projects, but I wasn't sure when you got to the program level where it breaks down with the resources. Could you talk a little bit about that? I think you were referring to the challenges.
Yeah, that was in the matrix. That was in the matrix, Reg, where you have a breakdown in resource allocation and legitimacy coming from two directions. Yeah, there. Reg, your mute is on.
Okay, brain in gear.
No problem.
Okay, so if we come to a classic sort of matrix organization, on the line management side, they typically, and I know there are variations, but this is pretty much the standard that I've ever seen in all the engineering companies and pharmaceuticals I've ever worked in, but there are different variations. But I'll just use this as an example. You have these functional experts as the line managers. They're typically there because they're experts. So you can have a mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, chemistry, and so on. So they are responsible for people who are their own experts in their own world or work within that expertise along this line, okay? So that's why I've kept the colors the same here. And here you have a project. So these are all different projects. And the project manager here is responsible for bringing in the resources along here as and when unnecessary. And these are changing all the time depending where they are in the project. And so some of this resource here could come in here at a later time and so forth. So you're always moving resources around. And what you typically have is a core of people in a program. A program is a number of projects. So if you're trying to design, I don't know, a new washing machine, then you will have different projects. You'll have a project for the people who are doing with the frame and all the paneling, another one is dealing with the engineering of the motors and things like that, and so forth. So that each of these will make their washing machine at the end, and they come under a program management system. That program manager is responsible for making sure all those projects are aligned and come together by the end of the contract. And so in a nice world, the line management, the expert, will have an agreement with the project manager on the boundaries of their responsibilities. And typically, a project manager in most organizations has no real authority over the individuals that they rely on for their project, because the line management has that authority. Depending on the sophistication of the project and the type of organization, often you have agreements between the two on who has responsibility for certain aspects of the person who's part of the project. That can hold true until we start to get into resource shortages or timetables are buffering, so that it's the resource utility is not as was originally planned from one project to another, from one program to another. So you start to not only have the tensions between the project management and the line management side, but also between the program managers, particularly if they have, as we currently have had, these shortages of ECUs on the technical side, problems with transport from one location to another on the logistics side. And so the most engineering companies, and I'm pretty sure it's in other areas as well, they're having logistical problems with their programs meeting their timetables because they don't get what they need when they need it. And so we're now getting programs that are really interacting and interrupting each other in terms of resources, whether that's physical resources or people. And so this is why you get all these tensions, and the line management, because it's still a hierarchical organization, have the legitimate authority. And so they tend to overrule the others. And this causes many, many problems with the customer side, because the projects are affected and they affect the customer. But the line management isn't measured on the customer satisfaction. The program management is, and the project management is. And the technical line management isn't measured typically in performance measurement on the external outside customers' satisfaction and delivery. So you have this tension of objectives, expectations, and authority positions, the power that are invested in them in the matrix. So it doesn't resolve the problems that they thought it would. Does that help you?
It does. So really, just to check for understanding here. So really the challenge comes down to they aren't being measured for the same, for the outcomes, right? For the customer outcomes.
But even if they were,
that performance management issues come in.
it's not easy, because the line management expert has to provide resources, in this case, to 8 projects. And so if all 8 projects are working to different customers, then the line manager cannot have a performance management system on all 8 of those customers very easily. Anything's possible, but it's not practical. It's an inbuilt problem that you can try and maneuver around, but it's got an underlying fundamental problem. And it's really so well documented and researched. Everyone knows this, but they have yet to find or agree alternative approach in most organizations. And as I say, more than 50% of the organizations in the Western world use this approach.
So they're not able to meet their objectives because they're competing for resources. Is that kind of the bottom line?
We're competing for physical and people resources. Then you get into the time constraints. If you've got
Okay.
it's very dynamic. It's not just one or two things. It's a whole feast of things.
Sure. Okay. No, I
And
was,
also the whole budget system is typically based on each project rather than looking at it holistically. And that's the other problem. Really good firms who manage to look at the holistic issue are nearer to getting their budgets right, but most of them don't. They work on each little project and then they put it together as a cost for a program. And every time it's underfunded, every time it runs over time. Because to do it another way, the price to the customer at the end would be much, much higher. And the customers now don't want that. They want quicker and less cost.
thank you.
So they rely on this robbing Peter to pay Paul, moving these resources around very quickly. And the other problem they have now, particularly in the technical world, is as the technology is becoming more and more sophisticated, we take software, for example, the software engineers, if you want to take one from this project to move it to this project, this time factor of the brain disengaging from this technical complexity and then engaging into there can be actually 2 or 3 weeks just to get back into the program. And then when they're moved to another one or back to here, you have again the same mental problems. And so where you have companies using this approach, the turnover of staff at the moment is going through the roof, and it's a massive issue. And in fact, I've just had conversations this week with one of the companies who's suffering from this now. And so this matrix issue may have solved its original idea, but it's created many more. John, what's your experience on that?
Yeah, 100%. It's just chaos. You know, you've got so that all of those projects are dynamic. You've got different different parts of businesses putting undue pressure on them, so you can't really program a year ahead because something's going to happen. A regulator's going to change their mind or something. So there's enormous amounts of pressure on it. It's like a trampoline, and you know it's just being pulled apart, and you wonder how the whole thing doesn't just burst open. You know, it really is. It's extraordinarily stressful. So you're working with, maybe sort of a manager or a team leader who's being tugged in one direction by one of the line managers, another direction by one of the program and project managers.
Yeah.
And it's really hard for them. It's really, really, really hard.
Yeah.
And the budget, as you said, the budgeting is just a nightmare because so they got to try to forecast a year ahead, and then one of the things will happen. It goes back to your power. Is that in order for the line manager to approve your budget, well, you got to justify these people. Why do you want 30 people? What are their jobs? But we don't know what their jobs are going to be. We're now going to be roughly 30 people. And so what I'm trying to do at the moment with my client is trying to just get them to not be so fussed about fine-grained budgetary data. Just use sort of a coarse-grained budget and just let team leaders and department heads just have a rough budget. I got $4 million for software staff, and don't worry about how it's made up. Just let them manage it themselves. Now that's a battle that's going to take another year.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I'm doing at the moment is the program managers, they have now got the authority for certain levels of power in terms of staffing away from the line management, and the program managers work together to match the resources because they have a direct impact on their customer. And now the line management are really getting angry because they're losing their perceived authority. But the ironical thing is, and I think this is applying more and more to organizations, the line managers are the highest level of expertise in these functions. So why are they wasted here making decisions about budgets and things when they could add much more value down here? And so that's part of the discussion at the moment. How do you reconcile this drift from being the expert, being promoted to the director who's the line manager for this expertise? It just does not make sense. And but that's part of another story later. But that's, I mean, Adriana, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. That the last place that I worked at it wasn't a matrix, but it was very much budget focused, and it was really difficult because we had to get large equipment for some of the classes that were offered, because they were in the healthcare field, and it had to go through not just our finance department, but it had to go all the way up to the board for them to approve the purchase. And it was just such a horrendous process from my standpoint, because I had to, I was the one who created all of the paperwork and worked with the vendors and things like that. And it took months to get an approval to buy equipment that we absolutely needed so that students could continue to learn. So, yeah, you have to remove some of the levels of authority and let the people who are in the middle of the work have some of that authority, so it doesn't take as much time. I don't know how you get to that point, though.
Well, we've got some ideas, but the other part of this, which is not even touched here, which makes it even more dynamic, is amongst this lot here, which I haven't shown, is the support functions. Okay, now you were talking there, Adriana, about getting permissions for budgets and stuff. Then the support functions way of being set up and the power they have and the processes they have are not aligned in any way with any of this. Whether it's this shape or the traditional hierarchy, because they're all looked at as separate processes. The work processes, then the work processes, you split into operations and support processes, and the two are never come together in design. They're done separately. And each one of those not only are separate, but each part of them are linear separations from start to finish, so there's no real integration even within their own categories, and that's just part of looking at the support side. And then when we look at the management processes, they are typically designed by activities to provide an outcome, but they're very, very structured activities. Let me just show you, let's just get this moving a bit, just briefly come past this. Well, let me come out of it and go straight into the other one. Where are we? Because if you start to look at the processes of the organization and the management, you've got this functional hierarchical and the compartmentalized, and you've got this isolated departments with pretty much no coordination really, and very little lateral communication. And so, yes, processes are crucial for linking these, and they wouldn't operate without some form of process. I think most people would agree with that. It's the type of process and where those processes are and how they're developed, I think is part of the critical point. And so if we start to look at them, then we've got basic work processes, and they're looked at and designed typically as interlinked activities and tasks, so that they just provide this integration to overcome all this compartmentalization. And then we start to look at the managing. And the managing process is the key part here, I suggest, is to identify the seemingly unrelated activities. So if we start to look at this, we've got the academic theories and all the gurus and everything. They look in these areas typically, the group dynamics, the organization theory, and so on, and the studies of managerial behavior, but they're all looked at separately. And they tend to focus on the trees, individual tasks and activities, and they're very much embedded there. Or they look at the whole forest. What they don't do is look at both together. And this is really crucial when we look at an organization, that we look at both. We look at the individualist and we also look at the whole. But interestingly, and when I talk to process designers, they don't do this. And when you look at the theory, I have yet to find, and someone will find one somewhere and prove me wrong, but that's great because I like to read it, that I've yet to find any research that brings these two together. Any.
Collective computation.
Say again?
Collective computation.
Collective
computation. Have a look at the collective computation people. So what collective computation is doing is coming from a complex adaptive systems point of view, and looking at complex adaptive systems as a collective computation of the component parts to produce behavior of the whole. And so it's looking at the individual component parts as well as the interconnections of the circuitry between all the different parts of the. So in your one, it'll be the trees, it'll be the roots, the mycorrhizal fungi, the whole lot, and how they're working together to produce a forest.
But from my understanding, and I'll check it again, John, and thanks for reminding me about them, that's still the trees. It's how they interact with each other, what they consist of, and all that sort of stuff. When you actually bring them together, then I even on that in that work, and if you know one, please point me in that direction. I've not found one where they bring it together.
Yeah, but it's not in the language of organizational development. It's in the language of information theoretics and entropy and all that type of stuff. So it's very difficult for a business person to get their head around. But I'll send you anyway.
I don't mind having a go because I deal with cloud computing engineering, so I'm quite happy to have a go at looking at it, and then I can always come back to you and help if I need help. But certainly, I would find that really helpful because I think this is critical, really crucial, because the management world tends to lack this holistic approach of either looking at one or the other rather than what is the impact of this individual in OD terms and some of the psychological stuff, the early stuff, they did that, but that sort of got cut out when the change management and the gurus came in because it's too complicated, I guess, for them to deal with. But and so what we end up with on the manager side is all of this allocation of roles and activity streams, and it's pretty linear. It's not dynamic, as you said earlier, and yet we know that the jobs of managers is fragmented. It's not some coherent system to achieve a decision. Every single decision, which may look the same, is totally different for all the different dynamics around it and the environment that it's in. And so we need to start looking at, well, for example, just very simple level, what about the telephone calls and all these meetings and stuff that aren't scheduled? This is sort of intangible deliverables in the systems approach to things. Very few people actually look at those. And yet, if we bring those together, they are part of the decision-making and activity of a manager. But the current systems tend not to bring these in because they are too intangible for them. How do I link all of these together? And so if we can start to bring the links among these activities, to what may seem unrelated in terms of tasks to achieve something, but they are part of the sequence of achieving those tasks. And if we start to look at those more, we can then look more into the detail of work processes, the behavioral side, and change processes themselves, because change processes are increasingly a continual part of the modern new power dynamic. Now we're moving away more and more from this episodic change into some form of continuous change. It now is very clearly part of the power dynamic of an organization. And so those are the areas that I'm trying to put together, and I hope it makes sense. And I'm really grateful, John. I'm going to look up this collective computation. If you've got any links you could send me, I'll be really grateful.
Just put on the chat for you.
Thank you very much.
And that's the homepage to the center of it, and then there'll be publications and videos, and there's a new journal coming out. It's a pretty new field of research, but there's a pretty good 1-hour video on the page which give you an introduction to it. Okay. But part of what I'm trying to do is trying to make that whole thing a bit more accessible, because it gets pretty mathematical pretty quickly.
Yeah, and that makes switches people
turns
off.
It
switches people off. Yeah. Okay. No, I'll look at that. That's really grateful. Thanks. But I mean, from all of you, any comment on this, the way I'm looking at this? Any observations?
I think your analysis is spot on. I think it's really, really good. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you.
Finding the solutions, of course, is not simple. Like, so one of, you sort of say you want to look at the processes, but it's the structure and the processes go hand in hand. If you change the structure, the processes will change. So one of the things that we're doing at these banks and things is we're trying to break down these silos and get units around value streams, end-to-end value streams. And then, just pull them away from the line managers, and you create independent cells which have got their own staff, own budgets around value streams. So companies like ING and did this, and DBS in the middle of it in DBS Bank in Singapore, and I'm trying to do it here at HSBC. But yeah, so it's the idea that instead of being sort of project focused, you're actually value stream focused. So what is it? The value stream ends at the customer output, and then say, right, how do we make the customer satisfied with a product or a product portfolio? And then you basically create end-to-end connectivity, and you get people out of these friggin' silos and out of that structure.
And how do you focus where do you focus the legitimate power? Because as we know, there needs to be a power dynamic in an organization because decisions need to be made. So then, are you breaking away from this hierarchy, or how are you doing it?
Loosening it, making it very loose, and if you like, it's a lightweight hierarchy, where yes, there will still be people in a almost a traditional hierarchy in order to make big decisions and make them quickly. Right? There's a category A threat to the organization. Everyone stop, do this now. Yep. So you still kind of need that thing. But then for the let's do innovation, let's do business as usual, let's do transformation as usual. Well, okay, let's go for it. Go for it. We'll get, if you present a reasonable argument, we'll kind of get out of your way. But it's early days. I wouldn't say that. Which country is this in? I'm in London.
Okay. And is it mainly UK based? This particular project?
Global. I've got teams in China, in Toronto, in India, everywhere, global.
And are they all approaching it through the same dynamic?
Well, it's early days. This is where we're heading. So at the moment,
okay,
imagine your matrix structure with broken bits, and everyone's running around like a headless chicken.
I agree. I was working with an organization that has a 7-sided matrix. I mean, don't even try and just think about that. But no, the reason I ask is if you're starting from the UK, I mean, I'm doing similar for a very big global organization, starting in Austria, or starting in Europe, because it's several countries in Austria, in Europe, in the EU. Let me, because Europe's bigger than the EU, but this is in the EU. And the reason that interests me is because the power dynamics in my experience of the UK is very different to my experience in Austria, because of the different laws and the different view of what hierarchy means in the language and so forth. So how would you envisage rolling that to another country with that difficulty?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know too much about Europe, to tell you the truth. I'm not too sure. And you spoke last time. You said that, I think someone, you know, if I own a business in France, I got to get the permission from the mayor and permission note in order to open my own business up. I mean, I don't know if I want to work in France. But to be fair, I mean, ING did it. They were the first big bank to go, and they did it from the Netherlands.
Yeah, but they broke all the banking rules in the traditional rules. I mean, not the legal rules. But IMG were seen as the black sheep when they started, I think.
Yeah, and they fired everyone. They fired all of the middle managers, and they said, you've got to reapply for your jobs. And the jobs were these kind of value stream type managers, and not all of them came back. A lot of them, you know, goodbye. And basically, it was the ones that couldn't be, I hate the term, but servant leaders, if you want. If they couldn't be kind of servant leaders, then, or have that type of approach, if they were too top down, then they weren't allowed back in again.
Okay, because what Ross and I are looking at with Futocracy is this legitimate power, traditional legitimate power,
formal power,
is at the purpose alignment team predominantly. You have it at level 3 with the executives, but that's not day-to-day business. And by bringing this to the functional level of the purpose alignment team, is so that the legitimate power is there if it's needed in terms of optimization of resources, if it cannot be done at the level 1. So it's a last resort, that's all, because it's not a line management function, but it has an executive function in the sense of optimization. And by going, and other aspects of the purpose alignment team, and going down that route, what I'm hoping, and I'll comment on this, Ross, if you agree or disagree, I think the purpose alignment team can be adapted whatever the culture is, and I mean the national business culture, because they're very different in the US as they are in the UK, as they are in Austria and so on, because that is what that constellation is about. It's about aligning the organization within its operating environment, which includes the country it sits in. How do you see that?
I like it. I actually really like it, because it's there's a sense of dynamics about it. There's a sense rather than a top-down control. Although there is a sense, there is some.
There's an inherent one, isn't there?
Yeah, and that's fair enough. But before I get into that one of the things I try, you know, you're talking about the informal networks. Yeah. One of the things I've always tried to do is to surface those and to submerge the formal networks. Yeah, and it's amazing just just doing that, how quickly you can get communication flowing. You know. Yeah. And that's, so I just wanted to, before I forgot that one. But yeah, so your alignment teams, I think it's.
The key
on it seems to work. Of course, it has to be dynamic because the purpose is changing all the time.
Yeah. Well, the main purpose doesn't, but the underlying operational purposes do. Yeah.
The purpose alignment team is not designed to make decisions as much as it's designed to make sure decisions are made.
Yeah. That's nicely put. Yeah. No, it's good. So it's a. In my language, I'd call it a mechanism from the mechanism design. Yeah, it's a good mechanism.
Yeah.
a decision-making mechanism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a decision-making mechanism, you're not going to get decisions.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, that's right. And also to make sure that as problems are identified, that the people who need to be involved are involved. But then
Yeah.
once they're put together in collaboration, then let them solve it. And the purpose alignment team steps back because they've done their job.
Yeah.
And coming to what you're doing, John, what I'm doing we have a lot of similarities, I think, what you and I are trying to achieve, albeit we're approaching it with a different mindset slightly. On the program side, we've got lots of different program managers with very highly complex multifunctional projects. So as an interim stage, what I'm in the process of setting up is a program alignment team, which then next step is purpose alignment team. And by doing that, I'm trying to achieve the same things that we're talking about, this dealing with this dynamism.
Could you have a performance alignment team?
No.
Because the performance is going to be at the cell level.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
It's at the operational level. Yeah, it's at the operational level. So it's got to be program alignment, and the alignment in the program is slightly different to the purpose alignment team, which is looking at the organization's purpose for being in business. The program alignment team, their main purpose is the customer's satisfaction at the end of the day, which means meeting it in the contractual terms and other ways. And so it's sort of a half step to removing away from how the hierarchy traditionally works.
Yeah. Is a bridge between customer focus and purpose alignment.
Yeah. So before, Ross, you said that the purpose of the business doesn't change, but surely it has to. Surely the purpose of the business has to change as the market changes.
The purpose does change, but it changes slowly.
Yeah, sure. Fair enough. Yeah, it's a very coarse variable.
Right.
Let's clarify what we mean by purpose. I think we're watching a similar film with different soundtracks here. What do we mean by what do you mean by purpose, John?
Oh, well, I assume you meant the purpose would be the purpose of the business. So the purpose of the business would be, the purpose of a bank. A couple of purposes, but I'm in the debts, in the trading side. So the purpose of the business is to make money out of making trades. That's what they're trying to do. And whereas the retail bank would be the purpose of the business is around getting retail customers. Now, if you have a customer-centric viewpoint, the purpose of the bank would be to have happy customers and satisfy them with a whole bunch of services and products and things which keep them happy. Now that's going to change. That's going to change because the customer expectations and things are going to change. So it may change from. But let's just say if the customer's facing purpose is to basically get money from retail customers, and they're going to get money from retail customers by satisfying their needs. The purpose of the trading bank is to get money out of trading the market. Being bloody gamblers and trying to play with the risk, right? So that's the two different parts of the bank. So that's when you say purpose. They're not a phone company. Their purpose. Yeah. That's not what you mean.
But that's not what I mean. I think in my terminology, what you've just given are the business objectives, which will change in order to deliver their purpose. And the purpose is, what is the rationale for being in business in the true definition of business purpose, the statement of purpose? What do they do? Why do they do it? Who do they do it for? And how do they do it? And your purpose statement encapsulates those four things. And then the next level is where you split it into the front office, back office, just for terminology. They will have different objectives that meet the purpose. The purpose should stay static, but those objectives will change because the business environment changes.
Yeah. So in other words, they're going to be a bank because that's their roots, and they like to be a bank. They're not going to be a car company.
Well, let's use a car company as an example. If you were a car rental or a showroom or whatever, you can either have objectives, which is to sell certain cars and make certain
Yes.
profits, but your purpose could be, off the top of my head now, okay, is to provide transport or provide mobility for the world using the latest technology, blah, blah. Yeah, that's their purpose, and that won't change, but the way they do it will.
Yeah. So this is Kurt Lewin. Kurt, is Lewin? Kurt Lewin.
Yeah,
or
Kurt,
Lewin?
Kurt
Yeah.
Lewin was
Yeah.
part of the origins, but it's moved
Yeah.
on a lot since then. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you've got this, really the clarity of this statement of purpose, and if you're interested, there's an article on our platform that I put there that goes through this. Then it gives you more flexibility.
Sure.
Because if you're in the mobility business, you could be building, renting, whatever the mobility.
No. Because interestingly enough, I had a very large automotive client back in Australia, and one of the things I tried to do with their Exco was, because they were going to be threatened by autonomous cars and stuff, is to try to get them to think about a bigger purpose.
I've just done this with one of the big car companies in Austria, who sell cars and repair them, traditional car showroom type place. They're doing this reorganization, and so I've encouraged them to go into the mobility business, and now it's opened up all sorts of avenues for them, and they're over the moon, because particularly in Europe, with the crashing of internal combustion engines being bad news, they're looking at all sorts of other forms. And so this restatement of the purpose, I think, is very important. Adriana, Jen, we sort of cut you out of there for a minute. Any comments or anything you'd like to say?
I don't think I have anything to add. The only, as John said, it's very complicated, and to go back to the original question at the beginning of the meeting, then how do we do performance management? I don't know. Do you have any suggestions? I think you're muted.
I've ideas which I'm sort of developing in this area, and it really comes back to what do people come to work for? Because we know that every time the organizations have tried to drive performance from an organizational point of view, it's not really worked. They were always used to, I'm trying to remember the name of the company now, but many years ago when I was doing strategic management with MBA students and things, I used to give them the case of a company in America who at that time was the world's leader in making money. And their headquarters was one room on the 10th floor of the cheapest building in the city. And the owner sat in one corner, and the 25 admin staff sat in the rest of the room, and nobody else was allowed to go there without appointment, even if they were other workforce, because they were a sales force. And his quotes at the time were, "I only employ highly motivated, driven people, and I will drive them until they drop, and then they will leave my organization. And when they've recovered, if they want to come back, then they can. And I will pay just a little bit above the average, so they won't become super rich unless they really earn their money." And he never, ever had to recruit, and was the biggest money maker at that time. And so for me, this is all about what drives us. What do we go to work for? And everyone is different. Yeah. And so this is the end of the spectrum that I'm looking at starting to say, right, this makes sense now. From my generation, the baby boomers, to the current generation, they're totally different, the drivers and engagement drivers are totally different, and motivators. So how can we use these one-size-fits-alls that we're using now? We can't. How do we find a system that if you've got a couple of 100,000 people in your organization, if you're doing it on an individual basis, it's too complicated, probably. So how do you do that? And I think links into what John and I were talking about earlier, and Ross is totally with this, is this network of networks. By working in smaller groups of people, those people will bring into their network the type of people who want to work with them and are engaged in that type of work. And so the challenge is to make those networks attractive to people. And that means breaking away from this legitimate power system of we will tell you when to come to work and so forth, to let each team decide how they work and when they work, provided they are within the network achieving what the network requires of them. And so this is totally at odds with most books and research. Yes, John?
I stuck a link in there. Now this is
So again, you're breaking up.
Sorry, I might have my microphone pointed the other way. I stuck a link in there.
Yep.
And this is from some of the eBay agile teams.
Yeah.
They created their own performance management system, right? It's a peer-based performance management system. They sat down and they said, what do we want to hold each other accountable for in terms of performance? And they came up and they drafted their own criteria, being communicative, being all this type of stuff. And then they rated each other anonymously on that. They just knocked up a little survey monkey form.
Yeah. And
then they basically had a regular meeting to hold each other account to these things. It's brilliant. It's so simple and it's so brilliant. There's no top down, none of those performance reviews, none of this. They just kept each other accountable in more or less in real time.
Yeah, totally support it. I really do. And it's how do you get that to be accepted by these monolithic demagogues that we currently are creating in these organizations at the moment? And that's the challenge. I see it quite easily with some small organizations. It's how we fine tune it in a way that enables these bigger organizations to feel safe, because that's what it's about. It's power is about feeling secure and safe and taking the risks away so I still make my mega millions. So how do we help them feel safe with that type of approach is for me the question.
Is that eBay system a 360 or just a peer?
Yeah. So this is they went with agile teams and they said we want to be autonomous, and so basically they all came up with the criteria, and then they all vote on each other. So once a month up, and so I'd rate Ross and Reg and Jen and Adriana on those dimensions anonymously, right? You wouldn't see it, and then the aggregate would be formed, or we could see where things are going, and I'd see it. It's not hidden. So if you said I was, everyone sort of wasn't collaborative and kept on jumping in and interrupting, it'd come up. John's interrupting again. Okay, I'll go and interrupt. So.
Yeah. I mean, Ross, you mentioned 360. I'm really, really moving away from it. I find because it again creates hierarchies.
Yeah, I know. I agree. I was just kind of curious how it was actually implemented. I go back to the performance management system. Oftentimes is very quantitative. It locks things in for generally a long period of time, and it's not easily changed. Versus, I'm not sure if this is the right word. I'm thinking of like a variance control. That if you're just connected throughout the system, you identify variances from what would be expected from alignment, and then you investigate that and treat it as an exception with enough of sensing.
Yeah. Because I think what is also connected here is, and I can find it in a minute if you're interested, when you look at performance management, people make decisions about you typically based on outcomes, their perception of an outcome. Life's not that easy, if only that it was. And going back to John's comment about it's a dynamic world that we live in. And so if we start to look at the person and the outcome, the first question for me is based on what skill sets and abilities they've got, what their motivation is. Are they a motivated, engaged person or not? What's the environment they're working in? And what's the perceived amount of effort that they're putting to achieve whatever it is, the outcome? And when you start to look at those other dynamics, it's quite interesting, because the ones that really matter are actually created by the management who are rating the outcome, but they never take it into account. And so if you've got a manager who creates a really awful environment, then even the people with the greatest motivation and skill set will at best have a mediocre outcome. Whereas if you've got someone who's fantastic and really supportive, etc., you can have pretty low skill and lack of motivation and come out excellent. The whole thing is wrong from day one, because the environment and the role and responsibility of the organization is not part of that discussion. It's purely outcome driven. And very often the performance of effort and stuff isn't even seen by the management, because they never see them. So they don't know how to measure this effort, yeah? Or the environmental impact on these people. So for me, it's yet another reason why the performance management systems break down in these hierarchical organization. But coming back to what you were talking about with this link, they're creating their own environment, these people in their team.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're measuring each other within their environment. And they know the effort that each person puts in. So it's only right that this performance measurement, if you want to have such a thing, sits there, not in some legitimate power authority of a hierarchy. And so for me, it needs to come from that direction. So I'll look at that link with interest.
Yeah, it's a really good one. It's one of my standard ones when I'm trying to decouple. You got HR sitting in the room and say, "What are you going to do about performance management?" Well, you're going to get rid of it all, and we're going to get the teams to do this. And I've had some success. Some of them go, "No, we'll never do that." But some companies have gone, "All right, let's do it."
Any other questions or comments for today?
I got one comment. Was I late? Was it? I got my 3 to 5. Is the time slot changed? Was I an hour late? Was I?
No, 4 o'clock start, which is 3 o'clock with you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I seem to be. It seemed that you guys seem to be completely into the presentation by the time I joined. I thought I must have been late.
No, we just started.
No.
Literally just.
Okay.
started.
Good.
And again, these sessions are kind of jumping around depending upon the topics that people have, where we are in discussions, and our understanding, challenging ideas as we try to achieve some coherence. I've got a couple presentations I'm working on, but right now one's too long, too much detail. The other one's too short, and I'm trying to figure out how to pull stuff out of one and what is needed in the other one, or if I go more to a interactive discussion and less presentation. So I'm working on that, and I'll have something for that in the next couple of days I can send out in the conversation that we can talk about next Thursday if necessary.
I mean, Jen and Adriana, how's your presentation going since last time we met?
I think we have the basic structure put together. I attended a case study experimental group with the change management review last night. And Adrian and I sent you the resources, and it really went well. It was kind of approached as they presented a case study, and it was more of an organization. And then they asked they split us into groups and asked us, okay, so how would you approach this? And then we came back and kind of presented our ideas. And then the consultant said, this is how I approached it. And so I really appreciated how it was facilitated. And it was interesting because the way that this consulting firm approached it was for really for co-creation. That was the purpose. So I felt like that was reflected in the session. So it's kind of the direction that I envision this session being. So I think the next steps are fleshing out the case study so that it's meaningful, and then, hopefully encouraging people to engage.
Okay, so you're still working on the case study of your father, are you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it really sounds interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the more I talk to him, of course, there's more complexity to it. So
Absolutely, yeah.
it'll be interesting.
That's
Did you
good.
have anything to add, Adriana?
No, I think you got it. So I think we're good. I haven't looked at what you sent yet. I did see it pop up just before this session started. So I'll go in after.
Okay.
And what we have on the agenda is what you want and correct. If you could verify that for me later.
Okay.
Okay, okay, make sure, I just want to, off the top of my head, make sure that you got the time slot, we're straight on that, the event alignment. Like I said, I try to, each weekend, I try to catch up to see where I've got loose ends, and I can't remember if you're one of the loose ends or not.
I think we probably are. We're still
Okay,
working on the title and the description.
okay,
Yeah.
okay, because once I get that down, then I put something on LinkedIn for some more communication too. And I add you to a list I'm posting here and there of what some of the presentation topics are.
Okay.
And Ross, I'll set up that event because I have to set up the event. I'll be doing that tonight about 8 o'clock.
Okay. Okay, I'll watch for when those pop up. And like I said, next weekend, I'll probably look for any loose ends too.
Yeah.
Which subjects are you doing, John?
Basically a master class in complexity theory, right? So here's the basics that I reckon an organization design. What's an agent? I
remember now, because I'm looking to see how you differ from Gary.
Yeah.
Has a very fixed view on it.
I haven't written it yet, but I'll be pulling it from various different trainings. So I'll put it together in a weekend, and I'll see if it makes a bit of sense. I wouldn't mind running it past one of you before I go live.
Yeah,
bring it on a Thursday and run it past us all.
Yeah,
all right.
Gary. Yeah, Gary is really in the Knieven framework and narrative.
Knieven. You gotta say it right, Ken. It's Knieven, not Knieven. Knieven.
Yeah.
That's an Aussie trying to tell us how to say Welsh.
But again, he kind of ignores the rest of complexity science theory and practice.
Yeah, he really is focused through that one lens, isn't he?
Yeah.
And
but what that's the Knieven framework is quite a handy little. I use it in workshops just to try to help people say what type of decisions are you going to make here. Whereas where I'm coming from is a whole different thing. How do you view, if you were to view an organization as a complex adaptive system, which I argue it is, what does that actually mean?
Well, that's what's missing for me from Gary. It's that next step. Yeah, the theory is great, but then what do you do with it? What do you do with it? And I really wait for one of you guys to convert me. I'm willing to be converted, but I tell you what, I'm going to take some convincing in some areas. So I look forward to it.
And I was saying, well, I've got a particular lens that I see the world through. I'm going to try the best of my ability to communicate that lens without opening up an equation. So that's the difficulty, right?
No mathematics.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I might show there's some equations, but I won't talk about them. Like, this is, but what I'll talk about what it means.
Okay. That lens,
Yeah, but-
that lens for the most part is like 15, 20 years old. And
No, I'm using contemporary stuff.
are you okay? I'm interested to see what you've done because I haven't seen a lot that's been added on recently.
Yeah, no, I've used, like, for example, that link I gave you, that's exactly, that's one of the things I'll be talking about, collective computation and information hierarchies and fine-grained information and top-down causation and all sorts of interesting topics that will probably chase everyone away, but we'll see how it goes.
I really look forward to it. We've got a guy at the university who teaches mathematics, but uses not one number or formula in the whole semester, because it's about how to use mathematics and its value in what you do. And he's brilliant at it. And I think that's what's missing with these approaches is easy to blind people with the technical science and stuff, but then is what does it really mean in the day-to-day world? And Gary hasn't shown me that yet, so I'm hoping you can show me.
Yeah. Well, so I'm going to, I'm going to get someone to have a look at it. So, like a, what do you call it? Professional speech coach, just to have a quick look at it, just to make sure I don't get too dry and to keep it, because it can get pretty technical pretty quickly. Yeah. And she's told me I've got every point I've got to try to bring a story into it. Just a story. Tell me. So here, make a point, tell a story. So that's what I'm reconstructing. Yeah. So if I'm going to say non-linearity to you, I've got to give you a story about it. So that's what I'm doing now.
Good. No, that's good. Yeah. Or one story from beginning to end that weaves it all together.
Yeah, I don't know if I've got time for that. Maybe this time next year.
Don't really want to set a high benchmark or anything. I really look forward to it. Good.
Anybody else have anything for today?
Reg, I do have some thoughts on the performance management. I'd like to talk to you some more about this and the motivation theories and how to bring it on a team level. So perhaps, but I'm curious to see, because you've said before that the performance management systems are based on outdated motivational theories.
Yeah.
Have you written an article about the theories and then what theories we can look at moving forward?
An article, no. We've actually got a member who from memory, last time I read his stuff, because what's his name, doing this negative process.
Alex Bouting?
Yeah, Alex he's deconstructing all of these, and he's actually done one on motivation. If you go onto his links, you'll see where he critiques the theories. There are a couple of areas from memory, it's a while since I read them, that I'm not sure I agree with him, because he focuses down to two that he thinks are really good. For me personally, equity theory is crucial in understanding, and also crumbs. What's it called? It's gone for a second. It'll come back. Old age is catching up on me. There are only two theories, and they're not the two that he goes for. I agree that the research and theory behind this second one, which will come to me in a minute, is perhaps challengeable, but when you actually look in the reality of businesses, it's highly visible. And so theory doesn't always tend to prove the truth, as we know. What's it called? It's crazy. The brain. 3 parts. Come on, I can draw it. What's it called? Oh, give me some motivation theories, quick.
Well, McGregor's XY. There's
No,
the.
I mean, McGregor is
uh,
still alive, but it's not going to help us in performance management, is it? Where are we?
McClellan, Maslow, Hertzberg.
No. Oh, come on, brain.
Is it in one of your list?
Yeah, I'm just looking. I've even put
You got a paper on
YouTube videos. Hang on, bear with me.
You got Vroom, equity theory,
That's equity, yeah.
goal setting theory, Maslow's, McGregor,
No.
Adderoff, ERG, McClellan,
No.
Hertzberg.
No.
Okay.
Isn't it annoying?
You got Vroom's expectancy theory.
Yes, thank you. Expectancy, Vroom.
Okay.
I think Vroom is really, really applicable, and it doesn't. You don't need to be computational scientist to make sense of it. First of all, you've got to think that it's something you want to do. Is it doable, and is the reward at the end what you want? It's basically that simple. And whilst you could critique the methodology of identifying the terms they used, the actual process for me is critical. It's no good if the end product isn't what people want, which is what most performance management's about. They don't want this end product. Then the rest of it, you're wasting your time. Absolute waste of time. Equity is very important in today's society, even more than it's ever been. But there are behaviors in Europe that go against equity theory in many ways, and so it's not a demotivator, but it certainly isn't a motivator. But yeah, I mean, let's have a link. We'll chat again like we did last time, and talk through it, and you tell me your ideas, and we challenge each other's assumptions. That's basically what it's all about. Yeah. So if you message me with when you're available, and then I'll see how we can link up.
Okay.
I'll send you a link.
I added 2 links to the chat. The first one was a search. You kind of ignore that. Use a second link that gets into Alex's comparison of different motivation models.
Okay,
I
thanks.
can't
Maybe
see
he's done one.
I can't see the links. I don't have any links.
And it's in chat.
It's in the chat.
Click on chat at the bottom and bring your chat.
No, I can't see it.
I only see John's links in there.
You've sent it direct to me, Ross. You haven't done it to everyone.
Sorry. I'm sorry. Let me do this again. How's that?
That's
Ah.
better.
There
Okay,
they are.
very good. Thank you.
Yeah, because Alex doing some really deep dives into all of these theories and things, and being highly critical, which is good. I'm looking for the next stage in, okay, so what? What does that mean, and how do we take it forward? Which maybe he's doing in his presentation, because his presentation's on about researched stuff.
He's doing evidence-based.
Evidence-based approach, yeah.
Yeah.
So that means that he must be doing a counter side to this critique that he's doing.
Guys, I'm going to have to get going a bit early today. I've got quite a long night ahead of me still.
Join the club.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
Good.
Great chat. Really good.
So
All
Jen,
right.
drop me a link, a thing on the platform, and we'll link up. I'll send
Okay.
you then a link to talk.
Okay.
Okay.
Good.
Everyone have a great week. We'll connect again next Thursday, or between now and then, if something important comes up, just let us know.
Just one
Okay.
final comment from me. I put on the platform this subject, an article about ecosystems.
Ecosystem. Yeah.
I think that could be an interesting discussion in what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
It's I think
Excellent.
there's a lot to be learned from it. Good. Thank
Okay.
you all.
See you guys. Bye.
Cheers.
Okay.
Bye.
Have a good day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.